Welcome to the Josh and Josh Talk.
Whoa. Yeah, it is 2021. I can introduce myself.
All right.
It is also Josh with the Josh and Josh Talk Everything and Nothing podcast. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Welcome to the Josh and Josh Talk Everything and Nothing podcast.
Yes.
With me, Josh, and you, Josh.
And Josh.
And Josh. Two Joshes. Josh squared.
Josh I.
Josh I like that. Could that be a thing?
I think it's just Josh's.
Let's herd of Joshes.
Let's
do you remember back in the day? No, it was like a few months ago. There was going to be a battle of the Joshes online.
I heard about that.
Remember that?
I heard about that.
Did you follow it at all?
I got to be honest. I was on the fence. I did not take a side.
You know, a little kid won, right?
I heard.
I thought that was very heartwarming. I was like, good. That's like it's I hate it when people are jerks with my name.
Yeah.
Like there hasn't been any big high-profile serial killer with the Josh name, luckily yet. Yeah. But when somebody's an asshole, it pisses me off. So it's nice when there's something nice associated with our name, right?
Well, and I think it was fixed. I think the kid. I think people let this kid win. If I had my druthers about me, I'm thinking
the footage. If anybody's seen it, it's kind of suspect.
Well, right. And it could. Who knows? It could be a deep fake.
It's like a little person's body with the kid's face on it, and it's like, yeah, it was that kid. Sure.
I don't mean to be conspiracy theorist, but I don't know.
Roswell.
There's something going on
Roswell.
there. But congrats to the kid. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah,
congrats.
it's a nice, heartwarming.
Congrats. I'm sorry. Congrats to Josh.
Yeah, way to go.
I should respect it. I should say
little Josh.
Say their name. Yes.
Little
okay.
Josh.
All right. That's cool. Cool.
Big day
for us. Big day for us. This is the big topic we're going to talk about today.
It's a big topic, and that is policing in America, which is a very I don't want to say nebulous term, but it's a pretty broad term. So there's a lot to talk about. So we're just picking this topic this week, and we're going to do our usual tangents as always. But this is the only topic. So if you tuned in for me talking about Slim Jim reviews, that's probably next week.
Yeah, keep the submissions coming. We actually do have, so I was telling you, Josh and Josh Talk Wrestling at gmail.com, which was, I guess it is still active. You could still reach out to us there. However, we do actually have a new email. What's our new email?
Josh and Josh Talk Everything at gmail.com.
All right.
Same thing. A-N-D is spelled out, no ampersands or anything like that, no spaces. Josh and Josh Talk Everything at gmail.com.
Josh and Josh Talk Everything at gmail.com. Hit us up in the hot box. Yeah, let's get right to it. I think there's a lot of different views of policing in America. And I think sort of what we saw in the 2020 election, the conversation of, defunding the police was a big topic. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's that's kind of where some people are like, hey, we should defund the police. And some are like, well, maybe we should restructure the training of police. And then there's some that are like, we shouldn't have police altogether. Mm-hmm. Where are you at in kind of all this, Josh? Where's sort of your mindset?
I do support defund the police. I think the problem in a lot of these cases is just bad PR. People hear the term defund the police and they think you want to, and there are people out there who literally think this, that you want to take away all the cops' money so that they don't have anything out there. They don't have bullets for guns, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not the case. Defund the police is it's really about using the right tools for whatever the situation is. Currently, under the current system in most states and most cities, there are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, let's say somebody's having a psychotic episode because they didn't get their medication or something. And they're normally a good person, they're not a criminal, they're not normally violent, they don't want this situation, but they're having a psychotic break or something, and they are endangering someone or they're endangering themselves, right? The solution right now, whether the person's violent or not, is to send a person with a gun. And you can talk about training and everything. It's like cops shouldn't be trying to treat people with a psychosis, especially in that moment, because they're trained to just view this person as a threat. How do I neutralize the threat? And sometimes that means nonviolent force, but more often than not, you hear about some sort of violent force, or they're at least detained in a very inhumane, very violent way that's just not necessary. If you just had a shrink out there, mm-hmm. or psychologist, or somebody who could have just talked this person down and just be like, okay, hey, hold on, all right, where are your meds? Can we get you meds? Can we just calm you down for now? And really de-escalate the situation. Cops, they're there to control the situation, usually with
to
force.
Restore the peace. Really, really their job is to restore the peace of what's going on. I guess so that's kind of my initial question there. So I hear defund police. To me, it's like, okay, well, why not, like, when we get these type of calls, a police officer shows up, they could, as far as page someone on call that would then send that person out. I guess I'm trying to figure out how would defunding the police help that out, like removing money, resource from the police.
Yeah, just divert that money.
Oh, so it's more of like a budget allocation. It's not actually, you're not actually defunding the police. It should actually.
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, some people will want to say that, but that's not really what the movement's about. It's about that, and it's also about the other side of it is when police departments for no reason get like fucking military surplus gear, tanks and just gear that they have no reason to have, like insane things like that, and that money is wasted on this like crazy shit. And it's like, I understand that Billy Bob, the sheriff's deputy really wants to try out that new LMG or whatever the fuck, so they end up with this shit and they're like, yeehaw, like, and they're having fun, but they just wasted like thousands of dollars, things like that. Like, and also just on top of that, cops shouldn't have this kind of shit in the first place.
So I guess to your point, it's be like I guess you're probably speaking outside of something like Los Angeles or Chicago or New York, something big where maybe like a major world city might need something like that. You're saying like kind of like a smaller county would buy something like tanks and stuff and all that. I mean, and it's kind of what's the need for it is what you're asking.
I would even argue that places like New York and Chicago still don't need that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Like, because we'll get into it, but the whole approach is fucked up. The whole thing's corrupted and bastardized, and it's just all fucked up. So like, they don't need any of this stuff. But that's what defund the police is. The problem is there's a lot of people who are just headline news people who just they see the term and they're just like, well, we can't defund the police. That's crazy. These crazy leftists. Or it's like Black Lives Matter. People hear that and they're like, well, all lives matter. It's like, of course they do. That's not what we're saying. It's just bad PR. Because I think the idea is great. Like when you actually look at what the proponents of the defund the police movement, the people who know what the fuck they're talking about, you realize it's not that unreasonable. Right. Just so many people don't necessarily have the time or desire to look into things further. It's
and I think for me too, like, in terms of the defund police, it is sort of bad marketing because I think they could use a lot more training. I think in a lot of situations, kind of the aforementioned example, I wonder if police could have some entry-level training into handling someone with psychosis and say to identify that trait and then say, hey, can I help you get your meds first? There's someone I can call for you, because again, if you don't know what's going on, if you're sort of trained this in the academy, you're taught to sort of handle things. We know that one size doesn't fit all, so maybe it's just like additional recurrent training where that, as far as the defunding of police, they could be allocated better to keep them, again, keep them more fresh, keep them more certified on an up-to-date on things, and they could maybe handle some of those entry-level things. I wonder if that would actually go a long ways,
I mean, I'm going to tell you, I don't think so. Like, I mean, like you heard the term ACAB, ACAB, you've maybe seen the slogan. Originally, man, was all cops are bastards. And by bastards, they mean bastardized, as in corrupted, in that every cop out there, good or bad, is in a corrupt system. They're corrupted by their authority, and they're corrupted because they enforce laws that target marginalized groups. So, like, you can't train your way out of that.
Yeah.
You can't change that. And the other part of that is just
you really don't. I mean, sometimes some people say that the best way to get over fear is through education. And I wonder if maybe more education would be opening some eyes, and they may actually change their perspective, and that perspective then may change once they get on the field, and it could be a trickle over process. I don't know.
Well, I mean that's working off the idea that there's like the good cops matter, right? Yeah. And I'm not going to sit here and say that every single cop out there is rotten bastard. Like there are cops who try to within their corrupt system that they're working with try to do some good. But the thing is, like, good cop or bad cop, it doesn't matter because they're complicit in the system. And you're going to tell me that a cop who's been on the force for a little while hasn't seen bribery, hasn't seen excessive violence, hasn't seen another cop doing something that abuses his authority, and by either choice or by intimidation or fear of reprisals, didn't say anything. You're not partaking in it yourself, but are you still a good cop? And my answer would be like, well, no, because you can't be a good cop. Even if you want to be a good person and a good cop, you can't be, because even if you do survive, you hear so many stories, and I could pull them up about the good cop getting fired. There was a guy who got put on leave because he blew the whistle on somebody, because like I said, the whole system is corrupt. The whole fraternal order of police, the whole thing is just built to protect, that big blue wall of silence, right? No matter what, they're going to protect their own. And again, you can't, it's just the type of people that cops are generally, the type of people that are attracted to police work. When you think about it, what police work is it's about controlling situations, right? Usually by force, sometimes verbally, but it's all about controlling things. And to me, not every single cop out there, but I feel like that is attractive to sociopaths, psychopaths, people that like to control other people, don't have the abilities necessarily or the desire or the want to learn about other cultures necessarily. Not all cops, obviously, but enough of them. I feel like enough cops that are out there are those kind of people that are just control people. You know what I mean?
I see your perspective on that. I don't know. It's an interesting perspective. I would say this, that, if that is in fact the case, I know that a lot of when they hire as far as law enforcement, there are certain identity examinations to go through. My hope is that they are weeding out sociopaths. But yeah, you think about it, across any industry nowadays, it's hard to find help. And it doesn't matter if it's a local Subway shop, sandwich shop down the street, or the bar across the street, or even law enforcement. It is there's a lot of positions to fill across. And I'm not saying that they're looking to hire anyone just that's coming through the door, but yeah, it's probably easier to get a job nowadays as a police officer than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and,
for a variety of reasons. But so my hope is that they weed those things out.
Well,
and I know I'm coming across as an idealist. I totally get that, but my hope is that we sort of think about what it actually means to be a police officer, literally serve and protect. That is what the oath is, right? To serve and protect the community.
But I mean, do you think that the average cop does that? I think most people would hear that and laugh and be like, well, that's not what they do. It's just not what they do,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of limitations they have too. Because I've actually, I've called before the police and I've had them think it was good to have them there to restore the peace just again, because I don't know that sometimes not having the police would be the answer as well. Because there's some situations where I've had to call the police before, and if they weren't there to sort of mediate the situation and restore the peace, as I mentioned, I don't know what would happen, But again, you need that kind of buffer. So I guess it's a question to you. So I've heard in some places actually, some counties have actually tried this. They have no law enforcement whatsoever. Is that a solution? To me, it seems nuts. Well, how could you ever do that? You got to have law enforcement, right? That's basically the purge. If you don't have.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's what type of law enforcement? You know what I mean? The thing is, and I meant to write down the statistic and source it in my notes here, and I actually forgot. So I'd have to try and find it, and we'd have to actually look at the legitimacy of the claim. But according to some statistic, average cops, beat cops, just regular driving around cops, not detectives, not SWAT or anything like that, they really only prevent 5% of crime. Mm-hmm. Everything else is just reporting the details of a crime to a detective or something. If it's like a big murder investigation or something, they're really not doing much to actually help anybody. They kind of you could say they keep the peace. My girlfriend, she's not nearly as fervently against cops as me. So she's a little more moderate, I guess you could say, on cops, right? And one of the reasons is because she was one day I was actually on the phone with her and I heard part of it, but she was walking down the street calling me, and and she literally lived. She's moving, but at the time she lived just a block or two away from literally the police station. Mm-hmm. And she was across the street from the police station. So there's coppers just hanging out and whatever. And this creepy guy apparently just came up and started sidled up next to her and was trying to walk next to her, way too close. We don't know what the fuck he was doing, but it was very creepy and very scary. And the cop noticed this and starts hey, and she's I don't know him, and he ended up kind of just taking off. Who knows what the situation was? But it was scary. And my girlfriend she's as much as I don't really like cops very much and I don't like what they do, she was glad that they were there at that moment.
I think that's exactly my point. People don't think about law enforcement for those reasons, because if you didn't have law enforcement, I mean, my goodness, you sort of leave it in the hands of two parties, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. Some people nowadays, it seems like they want to talk more with their hands than words. I don't know. If you don't have the police to break it up or tell people to go their separate ways,
right? Again,
I don't know. I to me, I'm trying to picture Chicago not having police.
Right. Well, I mean, here's my thing. The idea of having a team of people to kind of help out and just help out people to serve and protect, right? That's not unreasonable. But the problem is that what it's become, and kind of what it always has been. See, here's the thing. I got to go off on a tangent here and explain the history of policing in America, because there's two stories. The one story that you probably hear most often is it started off basically in Boston and then spread to some of the major cities in the north, Chicago and New York, etc. And it started off as basically like getting a team to watch the docks, the property on the docks, because there was a big shipping trade industry, and that expanded into the police force we know today. That's kind of what happened in the north, basically. But what you might not have heard is in the south, it literally grew out of the slave patrols. Slave patrols were teams of about 10 people, government funded, to go out there and enforce the black codes and Jim Crow laws. And the black codes are a whole mess of laws that were basically created after abolition. So the South was like, okay, black folks are free, but we're still going to make sure they're enslaved by a bunch of nonsense codes of curfews, how much a black person could get paid, where they could live, all kinds of nonsense to still kind of just to be assholes, you know what I mean? And it grew out of that after the Civil War. It grew into policing as we know today over time. So it's like, I mean, at its start, it was bad. At its start, it was racist. And it's just has anything really changed when you really look at it? So, I mean, I'm not against the idea of some sort of team to help out. You know what I mean? It would look different from what the cops are, though, and it wouldn't have a racist history.
And you look at incarceration rates, among as far as whites versus minorities, that is definitely eye-opening. Mm-hmm. It's definitely one of those things where I see the need for police, but I definitely see the need to improve the existing system we have. So what do we do? I mean, that's the thing. What do we do with all this?
Well, here, that's the thing. Most people would say, well, you talked about more training. I don't think you can train out certain things, but let's say we do that. The other thing is a citizens review board to keep cops accountable, right? You'd say, okay, that sounds like a good idea, right?
Now that's something, you bring up an interesting point there, because I swear every time I hear a police officer has this thing go down, there's oh yeah, they had 20 or 25 complaints. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I guess my first question is that average? Do most police officers have complaints, just given the law of averages, the nature of the business?
Right.
But to me, I'm like, 25 seems like a lot, and if someone has 10 or 15, that should be eye-opening and be like, hey, we need to investigate this. But I don't know. That'd be an interesting question. I'm not sure what the average amount of complaints a police officer should receive.
And I mean, the thing is, what's the severity of the complaint?
Well, that's
one
exactly
person,
right.
Some old woman said he spoke to her tersely, versus he kicked the shit out of my grandson. Or,
right.
That's a big difference,
right.
Well, so here's the thing. We talk about the civilian review board, and you hear about all these complaints. The problem is most of these civilian review boards, by the doing of the Fraternal Order of the Police in whatever county or state or city, district, etc., the thing is the police are a political group, unfortunately, now, and they have a lot of power, and they get people who cater to them, because what always happens, it seems, in a lot of cases, you find out that the Citizens Review Board, if it exists at all, is completely powerless to do anything. Here, I've actually have a few examples. In Urbana, Illinois, right in our backyard of Pangea, Illinois, in 2007, the police union made an agreement with the city to prevent the Civilian Police Board from conducting investigations into an officer's conduct, straight up preventing them from investigating any complaints against officers. In Bedford, Massachusetts, since 1980, the police union contract specifically states there will be no civilian review boards in the Bedford, Massachusetts police force. And then after the Breonna Taylor death, you looked into the Louisville Citizens Commission on Police Accountability, right? You think, well, what happened? What'd they find there after this Breonna Taylor killing? It turns out that they are unable to undertake investigations or even take complaints from citizens, as per their agreement with the city. In New Jersey, 2014, the Newark mayor, Ras Baraka, created a civilian review board, and the Fraternal Order of Police sued to stop it. So, you would say, well, give them more training, give them, review, and keep an eye on them. And they're too powerful. They don't want that. If I was a cop, I wouldn't want to be fucking, under any microscope either. So they fight, and unfortunately they have the power. These police unions have the power to put a stop to accountability. And they always claim like, oh, it's because, civilians don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand. Like one guy said it was like a mechanic taking a look at a plumbing system or something, like they just wouldn't understand. And it's like, I don't agree with that, because civilian review boards usually have lawyers, they have judges, they have people who understand the law and they understand procedure. It's just cops, they don't want to be held accountable.
Well, what we should do is you could just create like a Yelp page for that police station, and then just, put your experience on there. Like, hey, 4 stars, Officer Smith was a jerk, but
Right.
answer this question. I mean, why not? Right?
But I mean, you could, but if it doesn't have any like actual impact on the cop or anything, they'd laugh it off probably.
But Yelp does, right?
But it's not, like with Yelp, like if you give a bad review to Office Max and you read that, you'd be like, okay, well, I just won't shop at that Office Max. If you get a bad review at the cops, in most situations, you can't be like, well, I just won't call that cops.
Well, I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna get arrested at that police station. I'm not going there. Yeah.
I'm not going to grace them with my presence. It's just like, you could do that, and there are like pages that specifically cite officers that are psychos or assholes or bastards, officer blah blah blah, and like Cop Watch and Police the Police and things like that. It just doesn't. The thing is, like, they shrug it off. They don't care, because again, the police unions, like these are just a few situations that we know of where like the police unions have no power to do it, or the police oversight committees, they have no power to do this. When anybody says like, well, just give them more training or whatever, I understand that, but like that would be if you could count on the training to be good and the people to be good. I feel like the whole thing's rotten to the core, and it's always been rotten to the core. I'm not against the idea of teams of people using the right tools to diffuse situations, to keep us safe, things like that. But the way it is right now, it's not good. It's terrible. It's racist. It's violent. It's oppressive. There's so many stories I could tell you. I mean, we keep hearing about them, and it's great. But there's so, like, for every Breonna Taylor, which I'm glad we heard about her story, as horrible as it was, there's 100 other people that we don't hear about. Maybe people who didn't die, but they just got put in the hospital or something, or or whatever. Like, there's so many like videos that weren't captured of a cop shooting someone in the back. Like, it's right. So it's like, to me, it's like I all this information and everything. I can't support the cops as they are right now. Like, I don't want anarchy either, and I don't have a solution, because right now they're so deeply entrenched in everything, and there's so many people who would just blindly oppose it, mostly conservatives, to be honest. And my question is always like, to anybody who like supports cops or is rah cops, like, would you have that same opinion if you were a person of color? And you lived your life in America? Like, I can't imagine. Like, I'm white bread as fuck, so I try not to be like, well, I know how black people feel, or any of that bullshit, because I don't. I try to be an ally, and I try to understand as best I can, but I will never fully understand what it's like to be a person of color living in America. I mean, I remember one time I went to a store, and I was followed around by someone, some old lady who I guess thought I was going to steal something for whatever reason, and I was pissed the fuck off. I was like, what the, I felt really awful, and then I like a few days later I was like thinking about it. I was like, there's some black people who some black kid will go into the store and in the wrong in Wrigleyville or the wrong store, and they'll get that every fucking day of their life. So it's like. And obviously that ties into cops. I mean, cops kill or are violent with or arrest black people at a much disproportionate rate to white folks. It's that simple. It's right there. The system is rigged against black folks. And part of it is because we were talking about this before the show about inherited wealth and things like that. And a lot of white folks have that like base of financial security. Mom and dad own the house because their grandparents did it and da.
Right.
And a lot of African American people, when over time, they didn't get that.
Right.
They were freed, and then they're like, "Now you have nothing. Congratulations, you're fucked." And so it's like, so of course the cops, as always, want to support the establishment, the wealthy, et cetera, and that of course favors white people over anybody else. Really, I benefit from white privilege. I realize it, and I try to check that. I try not to be that guy, but it's like I realize that like sometimes store owners or store clerks or cops are going to be much more lenient with me than anybody else. I remember one time me and a few of my buddies were walking down the street late at night, and my friend Vinny makes the mistake of doing a cartwheel because he's a fun guy, and we're like 23, and we get stopped by the cops, and my hands are pressed on the back of the cop car as this guy pats me down and laughs at like the cards I have in my wallet. And I was like, what the fuck? You feel violated and shit. But again, it's like, this is life for so many people. So it's like, I can't support the cops, I'm their target demographic, apparently a white male who's at least middle class, right? Like, you would think that's the demographic that cops like. And but I can't, you know what I mean? I'm not going to support that. I can't do that until there's less justice and liberty for all. You know what I mean? We want for all. This current system's just fucked, man. And I don't have a solution entirely. There are people who come up with, scholarly types and think tanks who can come up with things. And cities, I know Camden has really overhauled their police department and things have gotten a lot better. There are solutions.
Yeah, it's almost like I'd like to see the fraternal order, as it were, work with a type of public review. And that would, I think, open up that would really spotlight a lot of things that were going on. Mm-hmm. That's where I think that, again, I talked about the training before. I think that actually could be coupled with it where, if officers aren't getting demerits, but they're actually receiving training to help out in certain situations. Mm-hmm. And again, they look at patterns. It would be no different than a customer service agent that, they do one call wrong, no big deal. But if they see their manager sees a pattern of poor calls, well, then we got to fix that. Same situation with the police officer. Obviously, there's going to be things that might be more urgent, like, hey, you're throwing people to the ground every time you arrest them. Like, yeah, that might be something to look into a little more urgently. But again, I think they look at patterns, and I think if they're open to that, and there's sort of this understanding that this is to improve your job, I think that could be a huge first step. But yeah, it definitely seems like until that there's at least the public has some say, and it feels like there's some type of collaboration between the public and I think the police. I think we're going to kind of keep going around in a circle, around and around and around.
That's the thing. Like, all these fraternal orders of police, they're going to keep suing. They're going to keep doing what they can to stop it. That's the trouble. It's like you need a new group that doesn't have this much clout, essentially, because when you get that powerful, you want to make the rules, and cops protect other cops. Like, you've heard cops talk about it. They're like, they don't know what it's like on the streets. You don't know what it's like. We're brothers. We got to protect each other. That's the thing. It's like the training that they start out with is basically some 800-year-old cop sitting there telling him that everybody's going to kill you. Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of part of their training, is to see everybody as a threat. You need to know how to kill every single person you encounter just in case. And then you're going to be like, but you're going to have training to like talk down a tense situation. And I feel like some people could do it, but I'd say that the average cop, because of what I feel, and this is just my opinion, obviously, I don't know if there might be no scientific research on it. I don't know. But I feel like the average cop, their demeanor and their psyche and their personality, I don't want to say it's antithetical to that, but it's not congruent with that. I would say they're not inclined for that kind of thing. And one of the reasons I say that is because there's a statistic out there from 2 studies that basically show that 40% of cops are their families are involved in domestic violence, over 10%, which is the general population. I feel like the kind of person that most cops are is just not that kind of person. You know what I mean?
Well, and there might be stuff they're taking in from their job too.
Well,
that's something else.
But that's the thing. Yeah, if it's stress, then they're clearly not handling the stress well, or they're just not getting the help they need. I realize that sometimes it's just a cop needs help.
And I think
because
that's
he's seen some shit.
Focusing on, yeah, exactly.
But at the end of the day, if they're a liability, let's just say, to be kind, no matter what the reason, you don't want them on the streets. You know what I mean? You don't want them to like, and now that the way our schools are loaded with cops half the time, it's terrible, I think. But like, you don't want that cop in your school, for whatever the reason. I think we're giving, I don't want to say we're giving them too much credit. I think we're expecting too much.
Well, and I think we're looking at it the wrong way too. For example, people that work in customer service, if you ever ask this question, I don't know. I'm always trying to think, like, we're getting all these calls in. Our goal should be not to receive any phone calls. So anytime a company looks at their customer service and they see they're getting phone calls, you should look at those as demerits, because people aren't calling in to let you know, hey, my product arrived on time.
Right.
And as I play with my product, I'm self-actualized and enlightened right now. Like, people aren't calling for that. So every time someone calls in, you lost or something you did wrong. Well, that's kind of the other issue too, is that I think that from the get-go, there's a lot of income inequality, which it forces people to commit crimes or be in situations where crime is more prevalent. And that actually, based on on top of the aforementioned things you said before, with sort of the perspective and public outreach or lack thereof with law enforcement, those things all just kind of create this perfect storm.
Yeah.
And there's things from the get-go, like we're not breaking the cycles, as far as our schools have problems.
Yeah.
Our schools have problems. So if they're not going to get a good enough education, they're not going to be ready to go on and do whatever they want, whether it's a, trade school, whether it's a university, and maybe they just want to be a general manager of a store. To be a general manager of a store, you got to know a little bit.
You still got to know what
you got to know what you're doing. You got to be educated, right? So there's lots of things. Education is really good to have, no matter what. And so I think it kind of starts at those levels too. And then you think about, the income inequality. It's harder and for minorities to get loans, and in some cases they're paying twice the interest.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. So that's an issue right there too. It's harder to get the same type of loans.
And this whole industry is set up because of that, to prey upon people knowing that.
Yeah, and so I think that we're looking at kind of the delta of the situation, but we should also be looking at the source as well too. I tell you, there is a lot to fix on that. Yeah, I think that if anything, to focus on some type of outreach from, and I think fraternal orders, I think unions as they are I think they are good things, but I think that if there is enough of this gap between the public and the police, that there needs to be filled. And I think there's got to be some type of, if not a review, some type of open forum between the two sides immediately,
one can dream, right? It's just, the reality is, that everything I've seen is everybody just putting a stop to it. One town actually did, I think it was Camden. Everybody just came together and was like, no, we're gonna just basically reset the police force. And apparently it's worked out really well. It's less, less violence, less arrests, just more outreach and grassroots community.
Well, how long has that been going on too?
Since George Floyd got killed, they because there was the riots, and they said, hey, we really got to actually do something here.
Okay.
And that's great. Right. There are possibilities. It's just very rare that the stars all align, where the conservatives actually get on board with because it's not going to be the conservatives pushing forth this plan. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be the conservatives who fix this. I don't know what to tell you, folks, but yeah, there are ways. Look at Camden. There are solutions, but if we keep giving police unions, etc., this power to have so much clout, and they've gained it over these years and decades with mayors and everybody, you know what I mean? They're not gonna be stopped. Like the inmates are running the asylum. Is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? They have too much power, and they're just going to say, well, no, we're not going to do that. Like when you have contracts and police union contracts that literally say with the city, no, there's going to be no civilian review board. Just no.
And I think that's where I think there's a start to all this. I think, circling back to mention before, I think, there's got to be some type of transparency on both sides to a certain extent. I think between unions, and I think between the public, fraternal order, if you will, all that. And that's where I think there's that mistrust between the public and the police. Again, it's a gaping hole, and it's a cancer that spreads. So I think that's right there. And I don't know if you can do a federal mandate on that, especially nowadays, but I don't know. I think that's where a start would be. And I would say to the law enforcement, like, what would you have to hide, right? There's nothing to hide, right?
Well, that's what they always say. Oh, if you got nothing to hide, you don't mind a search and seizure or whatever. But when it comes to them, they're like, well, let me just cover up my badge number during this riot. Let me turn off my camera. Oh, it malfunctioned. That's the problem. Again, is like, I feel like most people that are cops, don't want that kind of oversight because they want to abuse the power. You know what I mean? Or not most, let's say enough cops. There's enough cops out there that want to abuse the power. So yeah, they're going to always make sure to veto everything.
Yeah.
Or they just get into this sick and twisted mindset, I feel, after being a cop for so long, and then you become police chief, you get into power more and more, where you're like, you don't know what it's like. Cops, we're always getting fucked. Some junkie could come out of the alley and cut me, so we got to look out for our guys. And this blue wall of silence. I really do feel like that's a culture that perpetuates itself, especially when you have families of cops, and it just keeps going and going and going. And there's, you've seen how the alt-right can be sometimes with their cop love and everything. It becomes a cult-like thing, to just defend cops blindly, no matter what. Like, I remember somebody shared someone was killed, and they shared the coverage of the local news out there in Georgia. And so I got to see the comments from Georgians, theoretically Georgians, commenting, and it was really sickening, because these were people who were just literally spreading lies about the person, debunked lies. You go to Snopes, they're like, no, this person did not do that, blah blah blah, and it just shows you how entrenched some of these people are in this culture of cops are perfect, cops are our saviors, they're here to save and protect. And I'll tell you, they're probably a white, cisgendered, well-off person. You know what I mean? Because they don't have to worry about these things. The cops are there for them. You know what I mean? So of course, cops seem great. I don't see a way out of that, though. That's the trouble.
I think that's what we, both sides, and it's interesting because I think this really it's America, where it's one polarization after another, but that's where we're at. Yeah. That's where we talk about everything and nothing, but that's where we're at, is that both sides have to show transparency. And I feel like as the public, we're kind of forced to show as much as we can already. And I think maybe it is. It'd be great if in fact, I'm specifically calling out the counties where they're not allowing any type of review. I would say, what do you got to hide? And I don't think you have anything to hide.
That's the only logical answer, right?
Well, and I would hope not. But that's you're right. So, but I mean, that's the thing, is if you clear your name, you clear your name, right? And if you have a review, you have your review,
right? And
so I think that's where we have to kind of leave it at that, right? I mean, that's, if anything, that's our next step to all this.
Well, Josh, as NWA would say, fuck the police.
So I would say help the police. So that's where I'm going to leave that. But hey, we know what? We disagreed to disagree.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't want to listen to, we're at about 40 minutes right now without editing. You wouldn't want to listen to two guys just agreeing with each other the whole time.
No, right.
I'm like, that's right, Josh. Good point. I agree completely. Thanks, Josh. Well, I agree with your point. No. Right. You want that conflict.
That's right. It's right. But I think if there's a recurring theme, empathy. Try to see things from other people's perspectives. And you really got to look deep, because if you're a man, you got to look at it from a woman's perspective. If you're black, you got to look from a white perspective. White, you got to look at it, Hispanic perspective, and so on and so forth. Rich and poor, left-handed, right-handed, religious, non-religious. You have to really kind of see it from someone else's perspective. And that's where the empathy starts. And that's where the understanding starts. And my hope is at some point we realize that, we're all sort of glorified species. There really is just the one race. It's the human race. And we're all just glorified species. And unfortunately, some of our species, as it were, have had it worse than others. We got to get to a place where it is really a place for all. And I think that, again, opening that up to other perspectives, being open to real talk as it is from other people, seeing different perspectives, it's scary. It can be scary, but boy, I think you learn a lot from it. And I think it's where you got to go with. The empathy will do that too. Empathy is such a good thing, but it does take you to places where you weren't before. So,
absolutely, I agree completely. And again, I'll add on like I did last time. Take that empathy and then go vote with that empathy. Do some research and vote for people, because it's good to, be good to each other, but I want to actually make material change in people's lives eventually, and vote for candidates that are going to help spread that message and actually make those changes in people's lives, because it's a lot easier to be nice to people and happy to people when you yourself don't have to worry about money. Maybe you don't have to worry about being evicted from your apartment. You know what I mean? If you're happier because your life has been materially changed by a new law or a new regulation that your employer can't fuck you over this way or that, or there's a new minimum wage or something, that's going to really make it a lot easier to be nice to other people and to spread that love. In the movie Parasite, there's a line where they're talking, and it's like, oh, there's this, she was a nice lady. She's rich, but she's nice. Talking about this one character, and the other one says, well, no. She's nice because she's rich.
Right.
And if we just voted for, politicians who actually want to do something and actually level the playing field and actually, make it justice for all, liberty and justice for all, it'll be a lot easier to be nice and to be happy. And, unfortunately right now, I feel like there's a lot of people who don't practice what they preach out there. They'll be like, oh, I love everybody, and then they go and they vote Republican.
Well, to circle back on all this, and really to bring this home, I saw an episode of Cops some time ago, and the cop was being interviewed while they're driving around, and he said, really, my job is because unfortunately not everyone in the world can take care of their corner of the world, and so I have to help them out. And so think about that. How can you take care of your corner of the world? You can't save the world, but what can you do with your corner of the world, your circle of people? And I think that's where we start working outwards. They talk about peace starts within themselves. Then it goes out to the home goes to the neighborhood, so on and so forth. So, rather than just relying on the police, maybe what is it you can do in your own neighborhood? Just even walking up and down the sidewalk, picking up trash and having a cleaner neighborhood, or even planting a tree. I know that they've seen in underserved areas, when you plant a tree, it can actually prevent crime up to 25%. Just a new tree being there.
Really?
Before, yeah, it's actual stats that support that. So something to think about. So again,
do they say does it lighten people's moods? Does it make the area feel safer?
I think it's basically that. It's just think about it. Like if you suddenly don't see a tree one day and you see it there, it's like, oh, it's cool. Yeah, and it's just a nice looking tree. Who doesn't like looking at trees?
It beautifies the area.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's exactly right. And that's to the point I had before. Pick up the trash in your area when your block looks nice. People are going to be a little more put together. It's kind of like you go to a nice lounge and you get a nice martini and all that, and you're a little more dressed up, right? And you're a little more to the nines, and you're a little more with it, as opposed to you go to a dive bar, you're like just spitting all over the place and breaking beer bottles all over people's heads and stuff, and all that. So anyway, just to circle that back, take care of your corner of the world.
Think what do they say? Think globally, act locally.
That's right. That's right.
I'm full of slogans today. ACAB, defund. Yeah, I got this one.
Hey, man.
But it's true, right? It's true. Everything Josh and I have said is 100% unequivocally correct. Even when we disagree, we're still somehow both correct.
I'm always correct.
But I'm also always correct, too.
All right.
Could
Listen,
be.
But hey, y'all. Like DMX says, all right, break bread with the enemy, all right?
Good night, everybody.